Hey guys, tonight we're stepping barefoot into the quiet, lantern-lit corridors of medieval Japan, not the battlefield, but the other side of the sword. You won't be marching, dueling, or meditating on vengeance. No, tonight you're slipping off your sandals after a long day, brushing a bit of travel dust off your kimono, and wondering how to fill the next few hours before bed. It turns out, samurai weren't all death glare and duty. They had downtime, and surprisingly human ways of spending it. You duck into a side alley, the smell of grilled eel still hanging on your sleeves, your stomach happily heavy from dinner. A cicada buzzes somewhere in the rafters above. The castle is quiet tonight. No armor clanking, just the soft sound of your socks against woven straw. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, if you're listening from a cozy tatami mat or a squeaky IKEA bed frame, drop your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stretch your legs on a worn tatami mat, your sword resting across your lap, not for battle, just habit. It's been days since the last formal duty, and for once, your scrolls are all read, your armor's polished, and there's nothing pressing except deciding how to unwind. The samurai class, for all its deadly seriousness, actually had large swaths of free time, especially during peaceful periods like the Edo era, 1603 to 1868, when Japan was, frankly, just chilling. For over 2 centuries, there were no major wars. Just bureaucratic paper pushing, the occasional rice tax audit, and, well, moments like this. You, in your evening robe, wondering what to do now that nobody needs saving or beheading. The truth is, samurai weren't always stoic warrior monks. They could be petty. They gossiped. They got bored. A lot of them, especially in quieter times, were administrators, scholars, and estate managers. Some were glorified meter maids with swords, and in between those very official jobs came evenings of idleness, precious, meandering hours between dusk and bedtime. One common pastime? Eating. A lot. You might think of warriors as minimalists, but no. A hearty meal was serious business. Grilled eel, sweet pickled plums, miso soup, and rice so fluffy it practically apologized for being eaten. And once your belt is loosened a notch, the real luxury begins. Sitting still. Historians still argue whether daily samurai life was truly as rigid as portrayed in the Bushido manuals, or if those were more aspirational than actual. Kind of like modern gym memberships. You glance out the shoji window. Fireflies hover lazily. You could go practice sword swings in the courtyard, but honestly, your wrists are sore, and it's not like the ghosts of your enemies are coming back tonight. So instead, you lean back. Breathe. Rest your hand on your teacup and maybe, just maybe, you'll give in to the profound, delicious art of doing absolutely nothing. Not to say your mind stays idle. Like any proper samurai, you've got things on your mind. Whether your lord will finally promote you, whether the calligrapher you've been low-key flirting with noticed your new robe, whether it's even worth sharpening your short sword this week. Real thoughts. Real downtime. And downtime wasn't frowned upon, it was expected. Part of being a cultured warrior was knowing how to be still, how to recharge. Even the most hardened generals were often skilled poets and painters. It wasn't just flexing, it was a vital part of maintaining honor and emotional regulation. You weren't a good samurai if you were constantly twitchy and rageful. You had to be still enough to act with precision. There's something oddly modern about it. The push for mindfulness, the validation of rest, the slow recovery after obligation. Samurai weren't sprinting from battle to battle. Most days, they were just like you, finding meaning in the quiet and maybe low-key panicking about their reputation while sipping soup. And here's a quirky bit. Some samurai even adopted stray cats and dogs as status companions. One famous retainer in the 17th century left behind a haiku about his cat's soft footsteps on the roof tiles. Less warrior's lament, more, "Dear diary, Whiskers is walking again." That sound you hear? Not distant drums of war. It's your neighbor, another low-ranking samurai, softly plucking a shamisen while his kid recites school lessons in the next room. Domestic bliss, Edo style. No urgent scrolls to read, no nighttime raids, just the soft flicker of an oil lamp and your own thoughts stretching lazily toward sleep. You adjust your robe, reach for another sip of green tea, and, well, maybe tomorrow you'll practice archery again. But tonight, this nothingness feels pretty luxurious. You dip the brush into the inkwell, watching a fat bead of blackness swell at the tip. The paper lies in front of you, perfectly blank, begging you to ruin it with emotion. You're not a poet, not really. But something about this quiet evening, the warm sake sliding down your throat, the faint creak of wood as the house settles, makes the words feel dangerously close to tumbling out. Calligraphy, to the untrained eye, might look like fancy penmanship. But to a samurai, it's much more. It's discipline. It's expression. And, on nights like this, it's a performance with no audience. Each stroke demands stillness. A brush too dry, and the line looks tired. Too wet, and it bleeds like a cheap scandal. You aim for just right. Not unlike how you handled last week's sword inspection. You write a character. Pause. Breathe. Another. Somewhere in the back of your mind, your master's voice whispers, "Your brush reveals your heart." Which is unfortunate, because right now your heart is half full of fermented rice and vaguely worried about the cost of lumber. The samurai class was expected not just to fight and serve, but to feel, and then to write about those feelings. Elegantly, if possible. Samurai were trained in waka and haiku, poetic forms that often involved wistful nature metaphors and the occasional humble brag about spiritual enlightenment. You'd write about frogs, about misty mornings, about the way cherry blossoms fall just as you were thinking about your childhood dog. You know, real emotional stuff. And yes, sometimes your poems were bad. But that was part of the charm. There's a recorded haiku by a minor daimyo that simply reads, "The crow has landed, rice ball stolen again. Life is unfair." Historians still argue whether samurai poetry was genuinely heartfelt or just a required chore, sort of like those team-building icebreakers at office retreats. But one thing's certain: calligraphy and poetry weren't frivolous. They were viewed as spiritual companions to swordsmanship. Writing helped you focus, and in a world where losing your cool could get you very publicly disemboweled, emotional processing was pretty important. You pour yourself a little more sake, warm, not hot, the way you like it. The cup is tiny, which encourages slow drinking. Also, constant refills. Your cheeks start to buzz pleasantly. Not drunk, not sloppy, just that cozy, floating feeling where your thoughts get rounder at the edges and your words turn more generous. A perfect time to write something both profound and wildly overdramatic. Your poem tonight is about a rain-drenched pine tree. It might also be about your own deep-seated feelings of inadequacy around archery. But you'll leave that part unspoken. The best poems are the ones that hide things in metaphors and dare people to find them. It wasn't all personal introspection, though. Samurai calligraphy also had a competitive edge. You've been to those friendly gatherings where everyone unveils their latest scroll, pretending not to care about judgment while secretly praying someone gasps. You remember when Takeda-san used a gold-flecked paper and everyone hated it so much. You tried to act cool, but your poem that night was definitely titled "Too Much Ink for a Small Spirit." Even the ink mattered. High-quality ink sticks were made from soot, glue, and sometimes even rare spices. They were ground slowly against an inkstone with water, in a circular motion that was practically a meditative ritual. Some ink sticks were shaped like dragons or cranes. Some had inscriptions. Others were so expensive you only used them when you were either feeling extremely inspired or hoping to impress that visiting scholar from Edo who might marry your cousin. You pause mid-poem. Your brush hovers. Somewhere outside, a dog barks once, then gives up. The wind rattles the bamboo fence. The moment passes, and you finish your final stroke. You lean back, look at your work. It's okay. Better than last week's weird metaphor about clouds and indigestion. Worse than your famous autumn leaf floating where it shouldn't be. I should be working. But still, there's a whisper of truth in it. And here's the quirky bit. Some samurai were so into poetry that they joined secret haiku clubs. No, really. Men in armor would meet under moonlight to compare poems, judge each other's metaphors, and quietly seethe when someone else used the plum blossom metaphor again. In fact, one club from 17th century Kyoto banned references to frogs entirely, claiming they'd been poetically exhausted. Brutal. You blow gently on your scroll to dry the ink. The room smells like cedar and old paper. Your brush rests beside you like a sheathed weapon, stained, tired, dignified. No need to share this poem tonight. Let it sit. Tomorrow, maybe you'll show it to someone. Or maybe not. You've got another blank page waiting for morning, and at least 2 metaphors about cranes you haven't used yet. For now, you sip the last of the sake and watch the ink fade from glossy black to dull matte. The fire in the brazier crackles softly. You felt something shift in you, not big, not dramatic, but gentler, calmer. And in this moment, with no war to fight and no lord to serve, you feel strangely powerful, armed with nothing but a brush, a buzz, and an almost decent haiku. The bathhouse door creaks open with a gentle shh, and a cloud of steam greets you like an overly enthusiastic spirit. You inhale it, pine-scented, mineral-rich, just shy of scalding, and your skin immediately begins to soften like mochi left too long in the sun. You ease out of your robe, place your folded towel precisely on the wooden shelf, and step into the humid embrace of one of the greatest simple pleasures in samurai life: communal bathing. Don't worry, no one's staring at your scars. At least, not rudely. The bathhouse isn't just about hygiene, it's a whole mood. This is where gossip flows faster than water, and social pecking orders are observed more closely than tea ceremony steps. Rank matters, yes, but only up to the edge of the tub. Inside, you're just another naked guy trying not to slip on the stones. Public baths were more than just hot water and shriveled toes. They were the great levelers. Whether you were a high-ranking retainer or a lowly foot soldier, everyone soaked in the same steamy stillness. And yes, sometimes your lord bathed just a few feet away, creating that uniquely awkward scenario where you're both trying not to make eye contact while pretending your knees aren't squeaking. Samurai took bathing seriously, like ritual seriously. Cleanliness was tied to both spiritual purity and social respectability. Before formal events, after long journeys, or even just on an idle Wednesday evening like this, a good soak was part of your rhythm. It was also one of the rare places you could relax without looking lazy. Because, hey, what's more dignified than contemplating impermanence while wrinkling like a raisin? You settle onto the wooden stool beside the tub, dip the bucket into hot water, and pour it over your shoulders. The sensation is almost enough to knock the week out of you. Muscles you didn't know were tense start to unwind. The world muffles. Everything smells faintly of hinoki wood. And here's the fringe bit. Some samurai took extremely specific bath items with them. Personalized washcloths embroidered with poetry. Lucky combs made from tortoiseshell. Even miniature incense burners they could set beside the water. If you didn't bring your own bucket, were you even really soaking? Once inside the bath itself, conversation begins in carefully measured tones. No shouting, no splashing, just murmurs about rice yields, swordsmith gossip, or that one guy whose wife, mysteriously, went back to her parents' house for the third time this year. You lean back, arms stretched along the rim, and listen. The water licks at your chin. Historians still argue whether these bathhouse chats were politically significant. Were alliances formed between ladles of hot water? Was treason plotted in the steam? The answer, possibly, is yes. But also, a lot of it was just polite venting about sore knees and expensive sandals. The light in the room comes from paper-covered lanterns, casting soft glows and long shadows. Every so often, a new bather enters, bows lightly, and finds a spot without a fuss. You recognize a few faces. One of them is the monk who gives way to long answers to yes or no questions. Another is your friend from sword training, currently trying to hide a bruised shin behind a conveniently large towel. You stay quiet. Let the warmth do its work. This water, slightly sulfuric, seeps into your joints. Beneath the calm surface, old arguments dissolve. Pride deflates. You're just another body in the steam. And here's a fun little detail. In certain regions, samurai used sento bath tokens made from carved wood or ceramic, often engraved with clan symbols. A sort of loyalty card system, soaking, but with branding. Some even kept tiny bath diaries where they noted which spring made their skin softer or which attendant served the best towel folds. The old man beside you begins humming a folk tune. It's slow and off-key and perfect. The tune winds through the room like a sleepy snake. For a moment, everyone seems to breathe in time with the rhythm. There's a faint splashing sound. Someone's getting out. You follow suit, rising carefully, not because you're modest, but because the floor is a known death trap for slippery toes. You towel off with small, deliberate motions. In samurai culture, even drying your armpits had a prescribed grace. You leave the bathhouse with your hair damp, your skin glowing faintly like polished rice paper. The cool air outside kisses your overheated face, and suddenly you feel lighter, looser, maybe even nicer. You don't say much on the walk home. Nobody does. Bath silence lingers. You'll fall asleep easily tonight, and maybe dream of koi ponds or slow streams or endless rain. And the best part? Tomorrow, if you've got the coins and the time, you'll do it all over again. You stare at the board in front of you. Black and white stones scattered across the grid like the aftermath of a very polite war. You stroke your chin. Your opponent, your longtime friend, occasional rival, and full-time smug strategist, leans back with a knowing grin. He's 3 moves ahead. You're still wondering if the opening pattern you chose was inspired or incredibly stupid. This is Go, the game of territory and tension. And tonight, it's how you've decided to spend your precious few hours of peace. No sparring, no scrolls, just quiet warfare, captured in clinks of stone on wood. For a samurai, leisure didn't mean brain-off lounging. It meant sharpening different tools, the mental blade, the social edge, the ability to lose gracefully, or at least fake it. Games like Go, shogi, a chess-like cousin, and even casual ball sports like kamari weren't distractions. They were soft forms of discipline. Fun with an edge of pride. You reach for a stone. Place it. The click echoes just a little too loudly. Mistake? Bold move? Even you aren't sure. Your opponent raises an eyebrow. Not a good sign. Samurai culture held strategy in high regard, even off the battlefield. Go wasn't just a game. It was a metaphor for life, warfare, and clan politics. Every placement on the board was a declaration of intent, a hint at future plans, a test of patience. Historians still argue whether high-ranking lords used game matches as covert assessments of their retainers' tactical minds. Spoiler, they probably did. So yeah, no pressure. Across the room, someone laughs. Another group's playing Karuta, a fast-paced card-matching game involving poetry fragments and shouted reflexes. Less cerebral, more chaotic. You tried it once. Lost instantly to a 12-year-old with terrifying hand speed and no mercy. Never again. Back to your match. Your opponent traps one of your corners. You sigh, adjust your posture, and resist the urge to knock over the board and claim spiritual victory. You've been here before. you'll recover, or you'll lose with honor, which is its own kind of flex. Not all samurai games were sedentary, of course. When the mood struck, or when the moon was particularly pretty, you might head outside for a match of kamari, a courtly ball game with surprisingly strict rules. The goal? Keep the ball aloft using only your feet, but with the grace of a no actor and the coordination of a forest spirit. No points, just vibes. You remember one festival evening where you played barefoot in the palace garden, kimono hiked up, hair coming loose, trying to keep the ball in the air while pretending your hip wasn't spasming. One of the court musicians tripped, landed in the koi pond, and somehow turned it into a haiku performance. A beautiful disaster. Everyone clapped. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some samurai households had official game rooms, not for children, for the adults. Mats laid out, incense burning, low tables polished to a shine. Shelves lined with hand-carved game sets, each box passed down through generations. A family might pride itself on its swordsmanship, but secretly, they also wanted to be known as the house that always wins at shogi. You stare at the board again. Your opponent has paused, frowning at your latest move. Maybe it wasn't terrible after all. You sip your tea slowly. Let the suspense simmer. And while strategy games dominated the indoor scene, dice games also popped up, especially when sake was involved. Of course, gambling was officially frowned upon, but that didn't stop anyone. You once lost a perfectly good lacquered comb in a dice game you were sure was rigged. Still hurts. Still think about it. There was a practical element to all this gaming, too. Practicing composure under pressure, reading an opponent's mind, planning 10 steps ahead, all vital traits in a samurai's arsenal. If you couldn't keep your cool during a surprise shogi attack, how would you handle a real ambush? Your opponent finally places his stone. A bold move. You stare at it. That's going to hurt. But maybe not yet. You smile faintly. The match is still alive. There's a rhythm to it now. Place. Breathe. Consider. Respond. The outside world fades. Your only focus is this battlefield of inches and implications. Time slows. You're not just passing time anymore. You're inside it. Games weren't just pastimes. They were performances. A chance to show off intellect without drawing a blade. To bond with allies. To quietly test enemies. And, once in a while, to escape the burden of being a symbol. You make your next move. And this time, your opponent actually looks nervous. You might not win tonight, but you'll remember this match. Not because of the outcome, but because of what it revealed about you and him and the strange intimacy of two minds locked in friendly conflict. As the night deepens, the final stones click into place. It's close. Too close. A tie, maybe. You both nod, bow slightly. No gloating, no sulking. Just quiet satisfaction, wrapped in strategy. You rise slowly, legs stiff. The game board stays behind, scattered and silent. The match is over, but the evening lingers, warm and wide and waiting. You wake early, out of habit more than necessity, and find yourself alone in the courtyard. The air is sharp, just a whisper above chilly. Your sandals crunch softly on the gravel as you walk barefoot across the morning light, rolling your shoulders. There's no battle today, no drills, no orders waiting in your sleeve. But still, you bow to the empty space before you and begin to move. Not with a sword this time, but with your body alone. A slow pivot, a silent fall into stance, a breath, then another. This is jujutsu, not the kind for breaking necks, but for keeping yours from getting stiff. You're not alone in this quiet ritual. All across Japan, samurai used their downtime to train, just not always in ways that would impress a battlefield. There were endless forms, kenjutsu, iaido, kyudo, and more. But when the wars ended and peace stretched out for decades, many of those arts softened at the edges. They turned inward, less focus on killing, more on moving well, breathing better, and keeping your honor sharp even as your sword dulled a little with disuse. Historians still argue whether this shift toward form over function was a degeneration of martial tradition or a clever way of keeping the warrior soul alive in peacetime. What's clear is that samurai didn't just stop training, they just trained differently. Like you're doing now, barefoot, robe tied loosely, practicing a throw you hope to never use on anyone ever again. You step, pivot, and drop your center of gravity. The invisible opponent yields to your technique, the gravel untouched. It's part shadow boxing, part dance. Your breath comes slowly, evenly. This isn't about speed, it's about control, intention, grace. Sort of like writing calligraphy, but with the threat of a dislocated elbow. And it wasn't just for the body. Martial arts in peacetime became meditative, a kind of physical prayer. You'd repeat the same kata 100 times not because you needed to, but because something inside you demanded that rhythm. Move, breathe, focus. Again and again. There's something calming about mastering motion without adrenaline. You're not hyped. You're grounded. A man moving like wind over stone, performing deadly moves with no audience, no stakes, no blood. You remember your old instructor, more of a philosopher than a soldier really, who once told you, if you can defeat your laziness, you'll never lose a fight. He also had a weird habit of training in socks, which everyone pretended not to notice. In your youth, training was loud, barked orders, flying limbs, bruises that bloomed like plum blossoms. Now it's quiet, more about knowing your limits, less about pushing past them. A good joint lock, performed slowly, is like a puzzle solved. A flowing sequence is better than a clash, and sometimes rolling around on a straw mat with your neighbor is just a practical way to keep your spine flexible. Here's a fringe detail. During the Edo period, some samurai developed solo martial art forms specifically designed for apartment-sized training. One involved using nothing but hand towels and a walking stick to simulate disarming multiple attackers in tight quarters. Was it effective? Dubious. Was it fun? Extremely. You finish your sequence, wipe your forehead, and bow to no one in particular. You feel taller, more aligned, like a well-oiled gate. No one's watching, but you know the moves were solid, smooth, almost elegant. From across the compound, you hear a thwack, the sound of someone practicing kyudo or Japanese archery, the kind that values silence over speed. Hitting the target is almost secondary to the ritual. The way you step, the bow's creak, the release like a whisper. You tried it once and got scolded for breathing too loudly. Samurai often practiced multiple arts, not because they were bored, but because each one taught a different kind of focus. Swordplay taught presence. Archery taught stillness. Empty-hand grappling taught humility. And horseback riding taught you how to pretend your legs weren't jelly for the next 2 days. You wander toward the dojo and find a few others stretching, yawning, pretending they're not here just to socialize. Someone sweeping the floor with the kind of deep focus that says, "I'm technically meditating." A younger student demonstrates a flashy spin that would never work in real combat, but it looks cool, so you nod respectfully. Martial arts in downtime weren't always practical, but they kept the spirit awake. You weren't just preserving technique, you were preserving identity. You were reminding yourself and your peers that being a samurai wasn't a job. It was a way of moving through the world, even in slippers. You return to your quarters with your robe slightly damp and your knees quietly complaining. You'll rest soon. Maybe have some tea. Maybe write another poem. Or maybe just lie down, grateful for the strange peace of fighting nothing at all. You kneel slowly in the soft gravel, rake in hand, eyes fixed on a single jagged rock that refuses to feel right. It's not doing anything wrong. It's just there, smug and slightly off-center, throwing off the whole composition like a cousin wearing sneakers to a tea ceremony. You pause, adjust it half an inch, then another. Still wrong. Maybe it's not the rock. Maybe it's you. Welcome to your afternoon of existential landscaping, also known as karisansui, the dry Zen garden. For a warrior class known for slashing through enemies with ruthless precision, samurai also spent an impressive amount of time moving pebbles around in meditative frustration. The rock gardens weren't just pretty backyard arrangements. They were mental training grounds. Every sweep of the rake, every placed stone, was supposed to reflect inner order, balance, and impermanence. You glance at the patterns you've raked, rippling waves meant to evoke water, even though everything is dry and dusty. You step back, observe, frown. One swirl looks more like a cinnamon roll than an eternal current. Great. You erase it with one smooth rake drag and start over. Historians still argue whether these gardens were genuinely spiritual tools for self-reflection or just highly aesthetic stress relievers for warriors dealing with peacetime boredom. Either way, the result is the same. You, sweating gently in silence, trying to make invisible meaning out of rocks. The space around you is minimal, just a few large stones, carefully chosen, meant to resemble mountains, islands, or animals, depending on your mood or your level of sleep deprivation. Moss creeps in deliberately. Trees frame the silence. Somewhere behind you, wind chimes whisper, pretending they aren't judging your alignment choices. And here's the quirky bit. Some samurai were so into garden symbolism that they kept secret diagrams outlining the emotional geometry of their layouts. One diagram from the 18th century labels a particularly large rock as the stubborn elder who refuses to change. Another design grouped small stones into a triangle called the gossip circle. These were not just gardens, they were stone soap operas. You step around the perimeter. The sun is starting to lower, throwing long shadows over your carefully combed ripples. You try not to step where you've raked, but let's be honest, you already ruined one corner and had to redo it, so perfection is off the table. That's fine. Impermanence is the whole point, remember? Still, you can't help but wonder if anyone else feels it. This odd sense that a stone placed just so can calm your entire nervous system. That a sweeping arc around a boulder can make you forget your rice debt, or that embarrassing poetry night where you accidentally rhymed moon with noodle. One of your friends once said Zen gardening is just therapy for people who hate talking. You laughed, then stole the line for a poem. You pause your raking and sit on a nearby wooden platform, sipping cool barley tea. The garden stares back at you with polite, stoic silence. You stare back. Somewhere between the 7th and 8th sip, your shoulders drop. Your breath evens out. The gravel doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to reflect something true. Your garden isn't huge. You're not a noble with acres of stylized landscaping, but it's yours. Every rock has been moved, reconsidered, cursed at, and then moved again. It's a miniature battlefield where your ego fights your aesthetics, and somehow both lose. A dragonfly lands on the tallest stone, stays, then lifts off again like it forgot something. You rake a final path, not too straight. Nature hates symmetry. Then you put the rake aside, bow slightly to the garden, just in case, and rise to leave. But not before one final glance. And there it is, that little shimmer of peace, that moment when the gravel looks like a river, and the stones seem to float, and the garden, the one you argued with for an hour, suddenly feels like it was always supposed to look this way. You walk away barefoot, feet cool from the shaded ground, robe soft against your legs. There's dust on your knees and a smudge of moss on your sleeve, and it all feels strangely earned. Later tonight, someone will ask you what you did today. You'll shrug and say, just moved some rocks around. But you'll know. You were at war with your chaos, and you won. You sit beneath a maple tree just beginning to turn red at the edges, sipping warm sake from a tiny ceramic cup that's far too fragile for your calloused hands. Someone nearby plucks a stringed shamisen, the tune slow and faintly melancholic, like the background music of a memory you're not sure is yours. Overhead, the full moon hangs heavy, round, and impossibly bright, casting silver across the garden stones and the folds of your kimono. This is Tsukimi, the moon viewing party. And yes, you're expected to be both festive and vaguely poetic. The night hums. Fireflies bob lazily through the air like half-bored ghosts. A breeze rustles the tall grass and carries the scent of grilled chestnuts and incense. Around you, samurai, scholars, and courtiers recline on cushions, sipping and sighing, each lost in thought, or pretending to be. Moon viewing wasn't just a noble pastime. It was an art form, a seasonal ritual, and an excuse to drink under the sky without being accused of loafing. The full moon in autumn was especially revered. It marked harvests, change, and the kind of beauty that made you a little sad for no reason. Perfect for a samurai off duty and slightly tipsy. Historians still argue whether these gatherings were sincere spiritual observances or glorified cocktail parties with poems. Maybe both. What's clear is that you were expected to observe the moon, feel something, and say something elegant about it, or at least nod meaningfully while someone else did. You drain your cup and glance at the moon, trying to summon a deep, reflective thought. Instead, you think about dumplings, which is fair. Tsukimi dango are a staple of the event. Little white rice cakes stacked in a pyramid to resemble the full moon itself. Symbolism you can eat. You've already had 6. Someone clears their throat and begins reciting a waka about longing, the night, and a crane that forgot how to fly. Everyone nods solemnly. You don't really follow the imagery, but you clap anyway. Social cohesion is important. Also, that guy once lent you charcoal during a snowstorm, so you owe him. The moon itself is doing a great job. Bright, crisp, undramatic. Hanging there like it doesn't care how many metaphors it's inspiring tonight. You admire its indifference. Here's a quirky tradition. Some samurai would write spontaneous haiku on tsukimi paper lanterns, then let them float down rivers, little glowing poems drifting through the night like emotional fire hazards. Others held silent moon-watching contests, where the first person to cry got the last piece of mochi. Strange times. Tonight, your host has gone all out. The garden's lit with low lanterns shaped like lotus petals. A tray of salted fish and persimmons makes the rounds. There's even a decorative scroll hanging nearby with the character for melancholy, just in case anyone forgot what vibe we're going for. You shift your weight, glance across the group. A junior retainer is clearly nodding off. A noblewoman is gazing at the moon with a look that says, "I'm definitely composing a poem in my head. Don't talk to me." You, meanwhile, are caught between real peace and the minor stress of deciding whether you should also write something tonight. Your last poem involved a fox, a mirror, and a pun that nobody got. You look down at the inkstone beside you, brush in hand. You decide, not tonight. Tonight, the moon gets to be admired in silence. Let someone else wax poetic. You're just here for the glow. One old samurai starts to hum an ancient song, soft and slow. It's a lullaby, barely audible, about parting and pine trees and forgotten promises. You close your eyes. The music drifts. The sake warms your chest. Some say these moon-viewing nights were when even the hardest warriors softened, when grudges paused, rivalries dimmed, and everyone sat beneath the same sky, equally small, equally awed. You lean back, rest your head against the wooden post of the veranda, and let your limbs go slack. No one's judging. No one's speaking. The party has entered that sacred phase where time slows and thoughts grow round at the edges. The moon stares back as if it knows all your secrets but won't say a word. And just for a moment, you wonder if it's been watching you all your life. Each duel, each failure, each time you stared into the night and wondered what else you could be, if not this. Maybe that's why you keep coming back to these gatherings. Not for the poems, not for the food, but to see that same moon And remember, you're part of something still, quiet, and impossibly old. The shamisen fades. Someone yawns. You wrap your robe tighter and think, yes, this is enough. You adjust the sleeve of your robe and take a long sip of cold tea, mentally rehearsing how many ways you can say, I'm terribly honored, without sounding desperate. Across from you, your host smiles with all the warmth of a wolf politely waiting for you to leave. The lacquered teacups between you are pristine. The air is thick with unspoken debts. Welcome to the financially complicated world of the peacetime samurai. See, you're not exactly broke, but you're definitely not broke either. The truth is, while samurai held a lofty social rank, many were financially strained, especially during the Edo period, when there were no wars to win spoils from and few ways to climb without stepping on someone's extremely delicate pride. You were expected to look dignified, act honorable, dress impeccably, and occasionally give elaborate gifts, all on a modest stipend that hadn't been adjusted for inflation since the rice harvest of who knows when. You eye the scroll painting on the wall, cranes and pine trees, probably worth more than your entire sword collection. Your host clears his throat. You nod appreciatively. You've come here not just to pay your respects, but to quietly, diplomatically nudge for a little patronage, or perhaps a minor post in the clan administration. Nothing drastic, just enough to cover your ink habit and the suspiciously high cost of your youngest son's flute lessons. Historians still argue whether the samurai class truly understood money management, or if they were deliberately kept economically fragile to prevent them from causing too much trouble. One thing's for sure, being noble didn't mean being rich. In fact, most samurai weren't allowed to have side jobs, at least not officially. So, what do you do when you're too proud to beg and too underpaid to thrive? You get creative. There's a rumor that one of your peers, an elderly retainer with terrible fashion sense, has been selling antique swords to unsuspecting merchants. The swords are real. The antiquity, dubious at best. Another samurai down the road rents out his garden for wedding photos, claiming it's spiritually blessed by a crane he once saw. You tried a side hustle once, copying old poetry scrolls for rich townspeople who didn't know their basho from their basho. It paid all right until one customer asked if you could add a dragon to the margins and spell his name in sparkles. You declined, regretfully. And then there's the endless stream of social visits. These aren't parties. They're networking rituals in slow motion. You bring tea. You compliment the host's bonsai. You pretend not to notice the second cousin hiding behind a screen, eavesdropping for gossip leverage. It's diplomacy with a smile and a stiff back. The real trick, of course, is looking like you belong, like you have means, even if you're budgeting your rice portions for the week. Your robe? Re-dyed twice to hide the fading. Your sandals? Repaired so many times they've developed a distinct limp. You carry yourself like a man with wealth, because to appear otherwise is to admit weakness, and weakness, even in peacetime, is social death. You recall a recent moment, sitting at another retainer's home, listening to a lecture about how true virtue lies in simplicity, while the man's servants polished a gold-accented tea kettle behind him. You nodded, smiled, and mentally calculated how many weeks of miso soup you could get if you pawned your inkstone. Here's a quirky little detail. Some samurai took up composing music or painting not for joy, but because those artworks could be sold without breaking class rules. You weren't working, you were sharing your aesthetic sensibility. One clever man even framed his calligraphy sales as spiritual donations with suggested amounts. You finish your tea. Your host murmurs something about the coming winter and the cost of good firewood. You mirror his tone, casually mentioning your recent expenses. It's a dance. If he picks up the cue, maybe he'll recommend you for a seasonal advisory role. If not, well, you'll leave with dignity and a half-eaten rice cracker. Being a samurai during peace wasn't about action. It was about navigation. Navigating expectations, pride, appearances, and the slow sinking realization that your status didn't come with a retirement plan. You return home to your modest estate. The roof still leaks. The garden's mostly weeds. But the family is well fed. Your eldest passed his writing exam, and the sword on your wall still gleams, sharpened not for battle, but because it's the one thing you can control. You sit on the veranda, gaze out at the moonlit path, and laugh softly. You didn't get the appointment tonight, but maybe next time. Or maybe your calligraphy will finally sell. Or maybe you'll just host a moon viewing and hope someone wealthy is feeling poetic. The paper door slides open with a gentle rustle, and you bow as you step inside. The room is hushed, dim, and impossibly clean. Tatami mats stretch in neat lines. A single hanging scroll depicts a bamboo stalk bent under the weight of snow. In the alcove, a ceramic vase holds one wildflower, slightly wilted, perfectly placed. You kneel, careful not to disturb the serenity with so much as a creaky joint. The host bows in return, wordless. The tea ceremony is about to begin. You're here not for caffeine, but for stillness, for structure, for a strange and beautiful ritual where nothing happens quickly and everything matters. Chanoyu, or the way of tea, isn't a casual afternoon brew. It's theater performed with brushes, bowls, and boiling water. Every movement is choreographed. Every item has a role. The tea whisk isn't just a tool. It's a tiny storm. The bowl isn't just for drinking. It's a universe in ceramic form. You sit in seiza, knees folded under you, and immediately question every life decision that brought you to this posture. But you hold still, because in the samurai world, the tea ceremony is where swords and egos stay outside, and humility takes the seat of honor. Historians still argue whether samurai actually enjoyed tea ceremonies or just endured them as status obligations. Certainly, not every warrior was a fan of spending 2 hours quietly appreciating steam, but among the elite, mastery of tea became a badge of cultural refinement. The ability to perform, or participate in, a flawless tea ritual meant you weren't just a sword with legs. You were a person of taste. The host begins. He rinses the bowl with practiced grace. The water pours in a smooth arc, not a splash. He dries the rim with a white cloth, folded just so, before whisking the powdered matcha into a fine froth. You watch his hands, his breath, the way his sleeve barely brushes the table. It's mesmerizing, also slightly stressful. What if you slurp too loud? What if you bow too deeply? What if you sneeze? You don't sneeze. He turns the bowl and presents it to you with both hands. You bow again, receive it, and turn it clockwise before sipping. The tea is bitter, grassy, and slightly earthy, like warm rain filtered through a bamboo flute. You savor it in silence. No comments, just appreciation. And here's a fun fringe tidbit. During the late Sengoku and early Edo periods, some samurai actually fought duels over tea wares. Rare bowls were traded like treasure, and a particularly beautiful ladle could earn more admiration than a well-made katana. There's even a story of a lord who refused to go to war until his favorite tea scoop was returned. Priorities. You place the bowl down gently. The ceremony continues. More rinsing, more bowing, more quietly timed silences where everyone pretends not to be dying from knee pain. But through it all, something shifts inside you. It's not just about the tea. It's about the discipline, the control, the willingness to commit your full attention to something so small and subtle. You remember your old tea master's words, "This bowl contains the world, so try not to drop it." Samurai culture prized shibumi, the aesthetic of simple, unobtrusive elegance. The tea ceremony embodied that perfectly. No gold, no loud decorations, just wood, stone, water, and heat. A ritual that made you slow down, breathe, and appreciate how little you actually needed. And there's another layer to all this. The tea room is neutral ground. Enemies might meet here and share a bowl in truce. Secrets were traded between sips. Alliances were sealed with hand-thrown ceramics. The humble tea hut, with its low door and plain walls, often witnessed more diplomacy than the grandest castle hall. Your host sets down the final item, a sweet made from red bean and rice flour. You bite into it. Soft, mildly sweet, nothing overwhelming. It balances the bitterness of the tea. A final whisper of taste before the ritual ends. The host bows once more. You return it. The ceremony is complete. As you rise, carefully, slowly, trying not to groan, there's a sense of gentle satisfaction. Nothing dramatic happened. No decisions were made. But your mind is clearer, your breath slower, and your thoughts a little more aligned, like stones in a garden after the rake has passed. Outside, the wind rustles the maple trees. You walk away from the tea house with a strange peace in your chest. You'll probably be hungry again in an hour. But right now, you feel full, in the way that only quiet, deliberate things can fill you. Not everything a samurai does is loud. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is hold still and drink your tea. You squat on a sun-warmed patch of earth, a brush in one hand, a rice paper scroll pinned under your knee, and a blob of ink slowly soaking into your sleeve. Not ideal, but you're in the zone. Your hand moves with quiet confidence, painting strokes that are more muscle memory than conscious thought. A crooked pine tree curves across the page, followed by a swaying bridge and a hill that looks suspiciously like your neighbor's bald spot. You smile. Calligraphy and painting. Finally, a form of combat you can do while sitting down. Samurai were artists more often than they let on. Yes, they were trained in combat, strategy, and honor. But during the long stretches of peace in the Edo period, many turned to the brush to stay sharp in other ways. You might not be drawing your sword these days, but you are drawing a particularly smug-looking crane, and honestly, it's not bad. The cultural expectation was simple. If you were a warrior, you were also a man of refinement. Martial prowess alone wasn't enough. You were expected to compose poems, study philosophy, appreciate ink-wash landscapes, and, if the mood struck, crank out a melancholic haiku about rain dripping from your roof into your rice pot. You dab the corner of your scroll with a cloth and lean back, looking at your work so far. It's not going to win any imperial contests, but it's got something. Motion, balance, a little charm. Also, a mysterious smudge that may or may not have been caused by your elbow. Let's call it intentional texture. Historians still argue whether samurai really believed in the spiritual aspects of art, or if they simply used it as a way to pad their resumes. Some schools even graded sword students on their calligraphy, as if to say, if you can't control a brush, how can you control a blade? You rinse your brush in the little ceramic pot beside you. The water clouds into an elegant gray swirl, like storm clouds in miniature. You briefly consider sketching that too, but the wind picks up and blows one of your blank scrolls straight into a bucket of pickles. Art is fleeting. Here's a fun fringe fact. There were entire calligraphy duels. Yes, duels. Two samurai would be given a theme, a word, a verse, a philosophical concept, and each would try to express it with the most graceful, powerful brushstrokes. Judges would assess not just the beauty, but the spirit behind the characters. The loser would bow, and the winner might earn a reputation as that guy who writes like a god. You remember watching one such contest in your youth. Two grumpy elders hunched over scrolls, one with eyebrows like winter branches. They wrote in near silence, the only sound a soft shk 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 of ink and ambition. The winner's scroll read simply, "Wind over stone." You didn't get it, but everyone else nodded like it explained the meaning of life. Back in your little studio, well, it's technically a converted storage shed. You try a bit of poetry, just a fragment. Something about falling leaves and lost chances. You write slowly, letting the characters form themselves, each stroke deliberate, each pause a breath. It's harder than sword drills, but it leaves you calmer. You glance around. Stacked against the wall are old sketches, half-finished poems, folded fans you tried to decorate with ink cats. Some are terrible. A few are good. All are yours. Quiet evidence that you've lived more lives than just the armored one. And it's not just self-expression. You've traded scrolls with friends, painted greeting cards for relatives, even bartered one poem for a basket of pickled plums once. Art has its own economy, its own diplomacy. One well-chosen verse can smooth over an awkward dinner. A personalized ink drawing? Instant birthday gift. You reach for one last scroll, just blank for now, but already humming with possibility. Maybe this time you'll paint that garden you saw last week, or the crow that always looks at you like it knows something. You dip your brush again. The ink clings. The brush waits. And you think, not for the first time, that if the sword was how you survived, then this is how you stay human. Because somewhere between the strokes and smudges, between the perfect arc of a pine branch and the failed attempt at drawing a cat that doesn't look possessed, you remember who you are. Not just a warrior, not just a title, but a man, still learning to see. The room smells faintly of sandalwood and slightly stronger of old paper. You sit cross-legged at a low desk, surrounded by scrolls that look as if they might disintegrate if you breathe too hard. Outside, someone's trimming bamboo, each snip a soft metronome. But in here, it's just you and a stack of moral philosophy that could make even a monk roll his eyes. Welcome to your favorite form of masochism, samurai study time. Because while swords may earn respect, it's ideas that hold empires together. Samurai weren't just expected to fight, they were supposed to think. Deeply, painfully, relentlessly. And when the wars quieted down and blades dulled from disuse, many turned to scholarship to keep their sense of purpose. Confucian texts, Buddhist sutras, historical treatises, commentaries on proper sock folding. It was all fair game. You flip through a cracked volume on Bushido, the way of the warrior, and nod solemnly at a passage about self-restraint. Then immediately look away when you remember how much you yelled at a pigeon this morning. Progress is a process. The classic disciplines varied. Some focused on Neo-Confucian ethics, others on Buddhist emptiness, and a few on good old-fashioned war manuals filled with diagrams of how to stab someone politely. One of your personal favorites? A lightly fictionalized account of a general who defeated an entire rebellion by quoting Laozi at just the right moment. Unlikely, but inspiring. Historians still argue whether the post-war shift to education was a natural evolution or a form of psychological containment. After all, give a warrior too much free time, and he might start sharpening things that don't need sharpening. Better to occupy him with calligraphy drills and group readings on filial piety. You glance across your workspace at a list of duties you've been meaning to study. There's etiquette for court audiences, proper placement of offerings on seasonal altars, and, of course, the multi-scroll saga of tax policy in mountain provinces. You've read 3 pages. So far, riveting. Here's a fringe fact for you. Some samurai were so into their studies, they opened night schools, not for profit, but out of genuine belief in intellectual service. Imagine walking into a dim room expecting a sword lesson, and instead getting a 2-hour lecture on rice-based economies and ethical dilemmas in poetry. Surprise. But let's be honest, studying wasn't just about virtue. It was also about survival. Appointments, favors, marriages, even land rights often went to the most educated, or at least the best at pretending to be. You learned fast that quoting Confucius could open doors that swordplay couldn't. You stretch your legs and reach for another scroll. This one's a personal notebook, a messy collection of copied phrases, odd diagrams, and little doodles of animals that might be raccoons or very tired foxes. You've been building it for years. Your private mind garden, a record of who you've tried to become. And in moments like this, when the ink smudges, your back aches, and a distant bell chimes the end of another too short afternoon, you realize you like learning, even when it's slow. even when you forget everything by dinner time, because there's something noble in chasing knowledge you'll never fully grasp. You remember the time you tried to debate metaphysics with a visiting monk, only to misquote a proverb and accidentally say something about enlightenment through pickled turnips. Everyone laughed, even the monk, especially the monk. It's not about perfection. It's about effort, about facing your own limits and still choosing to keep reading. The sun dips lower and your candle sputters. You sigh, stretch, and scribble one last note in the margin. Tomorrow, reread chapter on sincerity and buy more ink. A humble to-do list, a quiet vow. You tidy your papers, stack your scrolls, and blow gently on the pages so they don't stick. Outside, the garden hums with cicadas. Inside, your mind is pleasantly full, not with certainty, but with curiosity. That's how you know the day was well spent. Because being a samurai in times of peace doesn't mean doing nothing. It means doing the hardest thing of all. Thinking. You rise early again, but this time with no martial forms to practice, no garden to rake, no host to impress. Just a robe, slightly wrinkled. Just the low sound of the wind through shoji doors. You light incense not because anyone's watching, but because you like the way it curls. Today is for rituals so small they barely qualify as events, yet somehow they hold your life together. You begin by sweeping. It's not dramatic, just straw meeting floor in slow, steady strokes. The broom is worn smooth from years of use, maybe passed down, or maybe just never replaced. You move it across the wood like a calligraphy brush over parchment, not because the floor is that dirty, but because the motion settles your thoughts, left, right, corners. That tiny pile of dust becomes, briefly, your greatest enemy, and then gone. This kind of quiet upkeep, the subtle labor of peace, is the unseen backbone of samurai life during downtime. You're not maintaining castles anymore. You're maintaining yourself, your space, your rhythm. Historians still argue whether these daily rituals were genuine expressions of Zen discipline or a clever way to disguise how little official duty many samurai actually had. But anyone who's ever hand-washed a garment until their fingers pruned knows there's meaning in maintenance. After sweeping, you set about mending a small tear in your sleeve. The needle bites cleanly through the fabric, each pull a meditation. You're not an expert seamster, but you've become better over the years. When you lived for combat, you didn't notice these things. You didn't need to. But now, a small rip can feel like a metaphor, and patching it, a quiet rebellion against decay. You sip tea, wash a dish, reorganize your ink brushes. You untangle a worn cord, oil the hinges on a wooden box that holds your father's old letters. You rewrap the handle of your training sword, not because you plan to use it, but because its presence matters. Here's a quirky, very real tidbit. Some samurai became so obsessive with their personal routines that entire instructional scrolls were written, like ancient self-help guides, outlining the ideal sequence for brushing one's hair, folding a robe, or arranging sandals. One surviving list even recommends the exact angle at which to hang one's towel for maximum visual harmony. It's gloriously unnecessary and deeply human. Outside, you take a walk, not to get anywhere, just to feel your feet on packed dirt. A neighbor nods. A child chases a chicken. Somewhere a dog barks like it just won a debate. You breathe in the scent of cedar and old rice steam. You belong to this place, not as a hero, not as a legend, but as a thread in the weave. Evenings bring another round of small order, checking lamps, sorting dried herbs, folding old letters you've read a dozen times. You hum an old tune. You write 2 lines of a poem and stop before the third arrives. That's fine. Some things are better unfinished. You recall an elder's saying, "True peace is found in the care of ordinary things." At the time, you thought it was just poetic filler. Now, it feels like a spell. You kneel at the household altar, simple, a little dusty, and light another stick of incense. Not because you're devout, but because that curl of smoke feels like a conversation with everything you can't name. You close your eyes, not in prayer exactly, but in thanks, for the day, for the silence, for the chance to sweep, stitch, steep, and sleep. Because this, finally, is the deepest truth of your downtime. It's not about escaping battle. It's about learning how to live without one.